Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of the Geeking Out podcast. I'm the Athletic Geek, and my guest this week is Jacques Kennedy. Excited,
Hello.
excited to have him on the show. Really getting interested in a lot of these great talents kind of coming from Central Illinois. And we've had Anakin Murphy and Rob Leach on the show, so I'm really happy to add another name to that list. Thanks for being on the show.
Of course, thank you for having me.
So my first question, as it is with every wrestling guest, is were you a wrestling fan growing up, and what got you interested in professional wrestling?
So, this might come as a surprise. I wasn't really a big on wrestling until way later into high school. Um
Okay.
Actually, scratch that. More yeah, I guess I could say I was a wrestling fan for quite a while, but there was a period where I had dropped off. My first wrestling show that I had ever sat down and watched in the in its entirety was WrestleMania 29.
Okay.
I was, I think, in sixth, seventh grade when that show came out. Whenever I had first watched that show.
Oh.
Honestly, not a very memorable show in my opinion.
Right.
Thinking back on it. The matches that really captivated me the most, I would have to say, were Punk and Taker, and
No
I
question, the
think,
best match on that card.
yeah, and then I think Taker and Lesnar was another one that really interested me.
Okay.
Other than that, everything else was since I didn't watch anything to the build-up of that show, I had basically no clue what was going on. After that, I had stuck around for a while. I think I ended up I dropped off from wrestling for a while for my first couple of years in high school,
Right.
and then I had picked back up on it,
What got
and
you?
I've
What got you to
uh,
pick back up on it?
honestly so me and Anakin had gone to the same high school,
Right.
and that's where I had met Anakin, and he's the one who kind of brought me back into wrestling.
Okay.
Um, so I started for a while it was very strictly just WWE, but then I started branching out onto the independent level of wrestling, and that's when I really started to think that this is something that I would want to do.
Okay. That answers my next question. Is what got you? Or not really answered, but kind of segues in my next question. What made you want to become a pro wrestler? What was it about that independent wrestling that made you go, "This is for me, and this is something you'd like to pursue"?
So it wasn't something that I would realize until I actually started stepping into the ring and doing it, but wrestling just seemed like such a great way to express your feelings in a way that no other art form particularly could. And another thing I'd like to mention, and it's probably the biggest reason I ended up becoming a wrestler, my father was a huge fan of professional wrestling. He had passed away when I was about 5 or 6. So in a way, I feel like this is the only connection I have left with him.
Oh wow,
And that's kind of what really motivates me to become a wrestler.
that's that's really good, man. That's awesome. Um, so you got motivated, through being your friendship with Anakin and the to honor your father. Um, how did you go about pursuing becoming a professional wrestler?
So for the longest time, me and Anakin had wanted to pursue training, and there weren't really any reputable schools around this area at the time that we wanted to begin training. Um, Fast forward about a year and a half, 3 years ago, basically, but at that time, you know what I'm saying.
Right.
Um, we found a school in East Carondelet that was ran by Cowboy Bob Orton,
Okay.
and we that was our first venture into training to become professional wrestlers. And at the time, we were both balancing that with high school, and from where we're located, that was like a 2.5 hour drive there and back
Right.
every Tuesday and Thursday. And balancing that with school was incredibly difficult, but overall, in the long run, it does pay off. Um, that was like, I don't know. I look back on those times like very fondly. I
Right.
wish that we could have spent more time there, but due to circumstances that I don't really wish to get into, it was just for the best that we decided to switch places to train.
Gotcha. Um, so you just said that you balanced your pro wrestling training with being a high school student. What what is that like? Because whenever I was in high school, I never would have thought about even doing something like pro wrestling at the same time as going to school. How difficult is that? Is that something that's, is it hard? Do you recommend that for aspiring people who know they want to be wrestlers in high school, or would you tell them to focus on their schoolwork and maybe play sports or do performance arts and sports or in high school?
So, as somebody who has never played another sport in their entire life or really done any other type of performing art, I think that you really, really have to want it in order to balance those two things out. Because there are nights where you're not going to get any sleep, and then you're going to wake up the next day and you're going to be like, wow, I have this really big test I have to do. I haven't been able to study for it. And it just kind of, it can be really overwhelming, but if you really, really want it, um, I say go for it.
Okay.
Uh, it can be very, very stressful, but I mean, I got through it. If that's anything to go by.
Right. um, so you mentioned you started training with Anakin, and I know on his episode he mentioned that he went to a couple different schools. Did you go with him to the different schools, or did you take a different path and then just kind of find him back? Take me through your journey after leaving Bob Orton School.
So after leaving Orton School, we had kind of like split ways for a little bit. I hadn't been able to really go anywhere for quite a while he was going to St. Louis to receive training. I had stopped in a couple times. No, I had stopped in one time at the school he was going to, but I had decided that that school particularly wasn't really what I was looking for. And then, like, after that, funny how it works out, we all ended up going to the same place we go to now in Springfield. So it kind of all works out. Uh, for a while, like, I had to rely on, like, just being at shows and picking the brains of other people.
Really?
Yeah, for quite a while. After I had left Orton School, that's how it was for the most part. But now, like, since I had started going to the school in Springfield, which I currently still go to, it's picked up a lot better. I've drastically improved since the time from leaving Orton's to now. Unfortunately, at this current moment, I don't really have much to show for it, but I'm hoping sooner than later I'll be able to show people what I haven't been able to show them yet.
Um, So you mentioned you were going to shows and you were, you picking the brains. Were you getting in the ring at that at all at this time, or was it just talking? What's it like, kind of getting your training through just going to the shows rather than going to a school on a regular basis like you were with Orton?
So by the time we had left Orton's, we were both taking bookings. We were both suitable enough in the ring to take bookings. And so a lot of the time it would just be me going up to the older guys and asking like, "Hey, could you watch my match?" And then I would go from there. I would take their criticism, really like I would really dissect that criticism and I would put a lot of emphasis on those things in particular. So I'd say in a way it would have been a lot more efficient if I had went to another school within that time, but overall, I was able to get this criticism from a bunch of different people that, like, getting that criticism from different points of views, that really helps, like, dissect exactly what's wrong. Like, if things constantly keep popping up, then that should probably be what you work on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like I feel like that way it's a lot easier to really pin down what your problems are at that current point because if multiple people are pointing it out instead of one person pointing out a specific thing, then you can really hammer down what you need to work on and what you need to do to get better.
Who were some of the older guys and the veterans that you looked to for that kind of advice and that gave you good advice? And if you'd like to, share what they told you.
Some of the guys that I remember specifically, like me and Anakin, had spent a lot of time getting the same advice from a lot of people. Um, a couple of guys I'd really like to highlight. Warhorse is one of them. We were
Awesome.
working a 01 show in Mattoon. I think it was in Mattoon. It was in the mall. Uh, it was our. It was me versus Anakin, and prior to the match, he had given us some really solid advice on how, like, our characters basically are what people are going to remember about us. And, like, how at this moment, while calisthenics are important, that stuff's going to come in time. But what you can work on now is the way you handle your character. And that is something that has helped me tremendously, especially recently. If you like go and you watch all of the matches I've had, I am very, very like I have switched my character so much because I just couldn't find any confidence in something that could stick. But now that I've had time to actually sit back and think about what I want to do, um, I have a very solid character that I'm really excited to show people whenever I come back.
Um, for those that may not have seen you perform yet, could you describe your character to some of those listeners, or do you want to kind of wait and till you're able to come back to show off and show that character?
See, I think it's better if I leave it to the people who see it first.
Gotcha.
It's very cut and dry, but I'm sure that everybody will be very excited to see it.
Awesome. Um, so you mentioned you went to high school with Anakin Murphy. You have any good stories of just being on the road with Anakin? Anything, you know, great matches, great moments that you guys had throughout your travels in professional wrestling?
So, me and Anakin are best friends. I love him to death. He's always been there whenever I've needed advice or anything. He's a spectacular wrestler, especially now. He's absolutely killing it right now, and I couldn't be more proud of him. Um, so, our first match together, when it was just us one-on-one at 01, we were so excited for that match. we we this was like our fourth match together. We had come up with a bunch of different things we wanted to do. And of course, we didn't really know how much time we were going to have. So the entire car ride there, we were planning out this big, like, super cool match for like 12 minutes, right?
Right.
Like, we were like, oh yeah, we're totally going to get 12 minutes on this show. And so we get there, and we're told, like, a couple minutes before our match that our match is only going to go 8 minutes. And so we had to cut a bunch of stuff off on the fly, and my personal favorite part about the match is probably at the very beginning. We had this spot where we were going to go through a bunch of elaborate pins, and it was going to end with me laying down, and he was going to go for a double stomp, and I was going to move. I forgot that, and so instead of doing that, I sat up, and he goes for a drop kick and basically completely whiffs it, and I don't know what to do. So I just lay down, and I'm like, oh my god. Like, I put my hands over my face, and I'm just like, pin me. That's one of my favorite parts. There's another part where I get him in a rest hold, and the crowd, being so nice to us that particular show, decided instead of chanting, Murphy or Anakin, right? The crowd erupts in this big Mountain Dew chant for his hope spot.
Well, do you want to explain why it was Mountain Dew? Is there something Mountain Dew related in the match, or?
No,
Oh God.
there's absolutely nothing related to Mountain Dew in that match at all. It just the crowd just decided that's what they wanted to do, and so we went with it. Overall, the match was pretty okay.
Right.
We've been wanting to run it back quite a few times now because we know we can do so much better now.
Right.
And I'm sure eventually, sometime in the future, that's gonna happen. Honestly, there are a lot of stories I could tell about Anakin. A lot of the time, it would be me, him, and Rob Leach all together in a carload.
Well, that was gonna
Um,
be the next person I wanted to ask you about is Rob Leach. Just I honestly I was so excited to have him because I feel like he's at such a young age really a really smart guy and really has a lot of knowledge for character work and in the business. I just have any stories about Rob?
um, like, we almost all the time we're all together. For the most part, especially around here, we're all like pretty much lumped together because we go everywhere together. And
Right.
so that's like, Rob is easily one of the most underrated announcers in this area. He's an amazing ring announcer. He kills it every time he goes out there to announce. See, me and Joe like to pick on him a lot, especially whenever we go out to eat after shows. I don't know how much Joe, my bad, Anakin.
Oops.
Whoops. Oh, okay. I don't know how much Anakin talks about what we do with Rob. We'll, like, whenever we go out to eat, sometimes we'll squirt ketchup into his sweet tea.
Aw.
Uh, we'll mix it in. I don't know if he has told you anything about that. We like to pick on him sometimes, but honestly, like, we wouldn't be where we are right now without him. He helps us out so much, and especially me because I don't have my own car yet. He's really helped both of us network, and we do try our best to recommend him to any promoter who's looking for a ring announcer because he does kill it every time he goes out there.
Um, so you talk about Catchman Sweet Tea. You got one more good rib story that you pulled on Rob.
So I'm trying to think. um, I really cannot think of one at this very moment. Um,
I know it sucks. I kind of put you on the spot, but I didn't realize that you guys were quite the ribbers.
Sometimes we can be pretty funny people sometimes. Um, we don't really give too many people too much because we're not like that.
Right.
Uh, I'm really trying to think of one. Yeah, no, I'm drawing a blank on
It's
that
all
one.
good. It's all good. What you're from the Central Illinois area. How far have you guys been able to travel, or have you been, just for your career to establish it? I know you've come down south, where I'm at a few times. What's the furthest you guys have traveled?
I think the furthest that we have traveled all together is Indiana. We've been to Indiana a couple of times. I have never made my debut proper in Indiana yet, but that's something that I'm sure is inevitable whenever I'm able to come back from recovery.
Um, so what has you laid up right now?
I I had tore my ACL. I
Oh,
had flipped the whole muscle upside down.
oh my God. When did this injury occur?
It happened during training. We were running through a crucifix pin drill, and something had happened, and it was just a miscommunication. Totally my fault. I was not basing properly for the crucifix pin, so when they jumped up onto my shoulders to pin me, I had dislocated my knee and flipped my entire ACL upside down. Uh,
Dang.
it
Um,
was it was terrible. It didn't really it was weird. It didn't really hurt when it happened because I was more concerned about the fact that I could not get up rather than it hurting at all.
um, so have you started to rehab it? Did you have surgery? And subs.
I
Go ahead,
huh?
sir. I was gonna say, go
Oh,
finish your statement. I'm sorry.
I have had two surgeries since it had
Oh,
happened. Uh,
ugh.
one one for the initial repair, and everything was going great for the first 3 months until we reached a roadblock where my knee would not straighten. And so they had to go back in and basically remove the scar tissue and do a manipulation, which basically cracked the scar tissue that was in there so that my leg could get the full range of motion it needs.
Oh, what? Have you been able, or have you started training again to get back into ring shape, or are you still on the road to recovery?
So, training in ring still isn't something that is possible at this very moment. Uh, I have started to do strength exercises and everything. I have finally straightened my knee all the way. Um, I actually get my recovery time sometime this week.
Okay.
Uh, and I'm really, really hoping, I know it's very optimistic, but I'm really shooting for about April.
Oh, that'd be great. And so that means you will have your by the time this episode makes air, you'll have your recovery time, and I'm hoping for good news for you. I really am.
Yeah, me too. They've been talking about giving me an athletic brace, which is perfectly fine. I'm fine with wearing a brace. I know some people don't like the idea of having to wear stuff like that, but it's whatever. The injury isn't drastic enough to where I have to change up my whole in-ring style, so I'm happy with it.
So I know you have a lot of wrestlers that are out there that have had multiple surgeries. And then you have certain wrestlers younger in their career when they get that first big surgery, they kind of go, maybe this isn't for me. I got to look to my future. Um, what is the mindset of a young wrestler with that gets such a serious injury like this to where, or at all were you thinking, man, I got to change things, or second guessing yourself, or was the passion for that art form still there that you were still full steam ahead on recovery and perfecting your craft?
At first, I was very, very upset, and for the longest time, I just did not want to come to terms with the fact that I would be out for so long because I genuinely I use this sport as a way to express how I feel. This is really more than a sport to me. This is something I really want to make a lifestyle. And I hear it all the time that it's not very easy to make it. But when things like that are constantly nailed into your head by people you're supposed to look up to, of course you're not going to make it. You really have to believe in yourself. You have to go for it. This is something that you're always going to have to chase because if you give up on the chase, you're never going to make it.
Awesome.
Um,
Very well said.
really, really, like, it's. I've come to terms with it now. Like, it is what it is. The biggest issue I have with it now is that I've done so much improving since the last time I was able to wrestle. Even, like, the last time I wrestled, I believe, was in June. Uh, and that was just a 50-second squash match, which at the time, fine, whatever. But like now looking back on it, I could do so much better than that. And that's what's really driving me right now is that I can do better than that. I am better than that. I want to show people that I'm capable of being better than a 50-second squash match.
Absolutely. Um, so you mentioned you're hoping for an April recovery. Other than other than recovering and getting back in the ring, what are your goals for 2021?
Really, I want to be somebody who really is like I kind of want to be one of those people that people think of. Like I want to be one of those wrestlers people think of when they think of some of the better technical wrestlers in the Midwest. I really want to work hard on becoming sound in my technical ability because I've always been fascinated by technical wrestling. I'm a huge fan of like Luthez and
Really?
Don Leo Jonathan.
It's
It's
very
just something about that style really captivates me, and seeing things that people never use anymore and knowing that like those things could still get a reaction from people. Like I want to be able to revive in a way that style of wrestling.
that's very interesting you said that because there's a lot of wrestlers and wrestling fans at this point that and I'm not knocking anybody's taste of their talent, but they're so enamored with a lot of the great stuff that's going on these days with people like the Young Bucks, Kenny Omega, or grew up with the Hardy Boys and uh, Rey Mysterio. All of my favorites right there. I mentioned, but it's just interesting that everybody wants to pattern themselves. It seems like after people like that, and you're a young man who's wanting to pattern himself after Luthez. I think that's really interesting, and that's really creative on your part. I have to say.
There's there's something that just captivates me about that style in the way that like it doesn't have to be slow and boring like a lot of people believe it to be. There's a reason that age of wrestling was called the Golden Age because people bought into that stuff. And now the style has drastically changed and that's perfectly fine. Obviously, I'm not going to just do what they did in the past. I have to adapt that to the modern day style. And I think all of that stuff, every type of wrestling has a place in the modern style of wrestling.
Absolutely. One last thing I wanted to ask you before we wrap things up. You mentioned earlier in the interview that you see wrestling as a way to express yourself. Take me
Yes.
through probably what you feel is the most satisfying bit of self-expression you have done in a pro wrestling ring.
So there are plenty of ways you can relieve your anger in perfectly healthy ways, but I think punching somebody in the face is a pretty good way to relieve your anger. um, it's just the physicality that comes with wrestling, something that, like, yeah, you're gonna get hurt too, but you can hurt somebody else. The fact that you control the narrative of what's going on when you're in control is really important to me. I think the fact that you and the person you are facing can control a narrative that you present to the crowd in a way that the crowd can relate to that narrative. Not necessarily everybody's an underdog who's getting beat up constantly, you know?
Right.
But they can take the bare bones idea of being an underdog and they can take that home with them and relate to that, you know?
Absolutely. Um, I've really enjoyed this interview. I'm really hoping that you can get recovered, get back in the ring soon because you very intelligent gentleman and with a great outlook on wrestling. And I wish you nothing but the best and nothing but success in your wrestling career.
Thank you. I'm really happy I was able to get on here. This is actually my first time doing a podcast.
Awesome. Well, thank you
Um,
very much.
of course, I'm really trying now, especially to get my name out there.
Um,
Um, Knowing how close my recovery time could be,
Um, you mentioned wanting to get your name out there. Do you have any social media you'd like to plug for anybody that may want to give you a follow, or if somebody else would maybe like to interview you?
you can follow me on Instagram at Jacques Kennedy Official. That's the same name as my YouTube channel, Jacques Kennedy. Twitter is Takeover Kennedy. Um, Facebook, Jacques Kennedy. I
Awesome.
know, not very creative with my
Hey,
usernames.
you don't need to be super creative if it gets your name out there, and that's what's important. But once again, I appreciate you being on the show, and I wish you nothing but the best. I This was really a really fresh take on pro wrestling, and I'm glad to see someone has that sort of take. It's a different philosophy, and I dig it.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all for listening to this. If you'd enjoyed this, please give it a like, share, subscribe for more content, not just from the world of pro wrestling, but from the world of comic books, gaming, anime, and all things geek culture. Follow me on my social media pages, facebook.com/athleticgeek89, Twitter at athletic_geek89, and Instagram athleticgeek89. If you'd like to help the channel out financially, I am on Patreon. Hit me up on patreon.com/athleticgeek89. Thanks to Jacques Candy again. I will have links to his YouTube channel and his social medias in the description box below. We'll see you next time.